Hello, welcome to the channel Why Stories. Enjoy watching.
Conrado and Marcelina made the impression of a successful and loving couple. He was a tall, blue-eyed brunette, and she was a blonde with a model-like figure. Several times a year, they had vacations in Dubai and the Maldives, owned a splendid apartment, a country house near her parents, shopped at the best malls, and had 2 fancy cars. Everything seemed perfect. Conrado owned a large advertising firm, so Marcelina didn't have to work. She spent her days at the gym and spa, met with friends, and accompanied her husband to business events in the evenings. Despite all these facts, Conrado and Marcelina did not love each other. 10 years ago, an ambitious young man from a small town came to the capital. He had just graduated from university but was determined to make a lot of money in the city rather than waste time in the provinces. Initially, luck didn't favor him. In the first 2 years in the capital, he changed workplaces at 3 companies because he couldn't get promotions as quickly as he wanted. During this time, he understood that the key to staying in the city and getting everything he desired was to adapt to life. And he didn't have to wait long for the opportunities to come. At a business networking event, he met a stunningly beautiful girl. Marcelina, despite appearing to be a respectable person, turned out to be quite frivolous. They became close the same evening. Before Conrado could comprehend anything, Marcelina had already suggested introducing him to her parents. That was when he realized how lucky he was. Marcelina's father worked in one of the ministries and appreciated that Conrado was so ambitious. After 5 months of knowing him, he made it clear that he would be happy to see the young man as his son-in-law. By this time, Conrado began to notice that his future wife was not as good as he initially thought. They still had fantastic sex, but there was nothing to talk about. Conrado, despite growing up in a small town, was good at drawing, loved cinema and photography, and enjoyed reading classics. In the city, he immediately enrolled in German courses. Marcelina, despite having influential parents, couldn't boast of knowledge or artistic interests. She liked fashion and travel and was drawn to the glitter and luxury of parties. Her mother joked that beautiful girls were meant to be silent. She herself had once been a beauty from a diplomat's family and chose Marcelina's father for his ability to establish the right connections. "I like that you're ambitious," Marcelina's father explained over a glass of whiskey. "Your business will grow 100%, you just need to choose the right direction." "I want something creative," Conrado explained, "like advertising, for example." "Excellent choice," the future father-in-law approved and provided money to start the business. Conrado hesitated for another month before proposing to Marcelina, but eventually admitted to himself that the unfolding prospects lured him and overshadowed the risks of a loveless marriage. These risks became evident in the 4th year of their life together when they discovered they couldn't have children. The tests were normal, but nothing worked. The in-laws frowned, but they couldn't intervene in matters of nature. A year later, Ophelia, a vibrant brunette with ample bosom and deep aquamarine eyes, assumed the position of creative director in Conrado's company. She immediately caught the attention of several men but maintained a distinctly polite demeanor with everyone, keeping her distance. Ophelia impressed Conrado with 2 degrees, proficiency in 2 foreign languages, excellent drawing skills, and a tasteful sense of style. Initially, he maintained a professional and distant relationship with her, both as a director and as a married man. However, during a project pitch for the city mayor's office, he saw Ophelia in a different light. Her efficiency, enthusiasm, good taste, and talented ideas captivated him. When the company won the pitch, he noticed her genuine joy and how she spoke kindly about competitors. From that point on, Conrado began developing ideas for pitching with Ophelia. Unbeknownst to him, Conrado found himself lingering at work, arriving at the office earlier, and evaluating clients based on what Ophelia would think of their company. He felt himself falling in love, realizing that the risk of a loveless marriage was about to manifest in his life. However, he couldn't restrain his feelings. Marcelina played the role of the wife perfectly. The father-in-law actively supported his son-in-law's company, but living without a really close person became unbearable for Conrado. Everyone went without partners to a corporate retreat by the river in the suburbs. Conrado invited Ophelia for an evening stroll by the river. The warm September weather, and they went too far from their place in the early evening darkness. Instead of turning back, Conrado decisively took Ophelia's hand and led her to a nearby wooden gazebo he had noticed. She didn't resist when he embraced her and, with broad, eager strokes, began caressing her shoulders and back, descending lower. She pressed against him, affectionately running her fingers through his hair and neck. "Ophelia, I love you," he whispered. "I know. But I haven't decided what to do with Marcelina yet. I can't divorce her now, the company is on the rise. It'll take another 2 years, or maybe less, to be completely independent of my father-in-law." He lifted her chin to read the answer in her eyes. "It doesn't matter, Conrado," Ophelia responded tenderly. "We love each other, that's enough." He held her close, inhaling the scent of her hair, joined by the fragrances of the autumn forest and the river. They returned to the recreation center and went to their rooms. However, that night, Ophelia came to him on her own and stayed until morning. Their secret affair lasted a year. Conrado felt guilty towards his wife and had a certain fear of his father-in-law, but his love for Ophelia was stronger. In an attempt to protect his happiness, Conrado began spending more time with Marcelina, regularly going on trips with her. During one of these trips, something the whole family had been waiting for happened. Marcelina became pregnant. The father-in-law was ecstatic and gifted the couple a new Mercedes. The news that the director would soon become a father spread instantly. Ophelia demonstrated incredible composure when she heard the announcement at a general meeting. However, the next morning, Conrado learned what it cost her. She entered his office, sat across from him, gazing into his eyes with her wonderful aquamarine eyes, and whispered, "You'll be a father soon." "Yes, I had to announce it. My father-in-law insisted." "You don't get it. I am pregnant too." This news shocked Conrado, and he was stunned for a while, absent-mindedly running his hand over the table. "I understand if you don't want or can't be involved in raising him, but I will give birth." "I will," mumbled Conrado. "I will definitely take part in it." "Good," smiled Ophelia. "There's just one but, I might have to go to the hospital. I've had a heart disease since childhood. I probably won't be able to give birth naturally. I'll need a C-section. I'm sorry I didn't say it earlier. I didn't think we would make it." A lump formed in Conrado's throat, but he held back. He approached Ophelia, placed his hands on her shoulders, and said firmly, "I won't leave you." The next few months flew by like one. Marcelina's parents were actively involved in their lives, and it helped him. The mother literally didn't leave her daughter's side. She supported her and attended regular ultrasounds. The father took care of the delivery place and the neonatal therapist. Repairs started in the apartment. One of the 4 rooms was about to become a nursery room. Conrado, with a light heart, stayed away from these hassles, feeling he was useless. Now that Marcelina was preparing to give her parents a grandchild, his mission seemed accomplished. For a couple of months, he even moved to live in the office to avoid wasting time commuting from the outskirts to the city center. However, he was worried. Ophelia indeed had to go to the hospital. He easily obtained information from the attending physician as the boss. The further it went, the more uneasy he felt. The doctor shared his concern. Ophelia might not even withstand the C-section. The baby was developing normally, but the mother's heart was genuinely very weak. The doctor thought it was right to inform Conrado about the potential tragic outcome. On the evening when Conrado learned about it, he drank heavily for the first time since his college years. The thought that a woman he genuinely loved might die because of him made him nauseous. For the first time, he hated everything: his career, the material wealth he gained through the advantageous marriage, Marcelina, and her parents. He wanted to go back to his hometown, stay there, meet a girl he could love, and raise children with her. He didn't need this city or this environment. He only wanted Ophelia and their child. He curled up on the office sofa and started crying as someone could when realizing the irreversibility of their mistakes. When he came to the renovated apartment a couple of days later, where a blue-themed nursery awaited a boy, he noticed that his mother-in-law was very nervous. She kept going to the kitchen and holding a batiste handkerchief in her hands. He went after her, and she, noticing his silent question, sat down and said in an agitated voice, "Conrado, the doctor saw something unpleasant on the scan today." He didn't say anything, but I understood that he didn't like something. "It seems something is wrong with the little one." "Nora, don't get yourself worked up," Conrado said sympathetically. "Marcelina is following all the recommendations, and we are all keeping an eye on her. Don't make things up." "I don't know." Nora wiped her eyes with a handkerchief. "What if something bad happens? I'm worried." "Does Paolo know?" Conrado inquired. "I haven't told him." "God, he's waiting for a grandchild as if it's a godsend. God forbid something happens. I don't know how he'll cope. They've already prepared the nursery." "Stop it, Mom," Conrado switched to a soothing tone. "Everything will be fine, you have to believe." But just 2 days later, only 2 weeks before the due date, the baby's heart stopped. Nora fell ill. Marcelina was inconsolable. Paolo didn't want to talk to anyone. Conrado dreaded the impending birth of Ophelia. Now he realized that if she didn't survive, he would have to bring the child into the family. And he would have to tell everyone about his affair. Dark clouds were gathering, and he could hardly imagine how his father-in-law would react to the news. But for the first time in many years, he had the thought that he no longer wanted to live in lies. He was ready to lose the business and everything acquired in the marriage with Marcelina just to get rid of this endless deceit. The doctors couldn't save Ophelia. The day before her delivery, he went to the hospital. Since Ophelia was his close colleague in the company, neither Marcelina nor the family suspected anything about Conrado's relationship with her. They didn't let him into the operating room the next day, and he would remember their last conversation in the hospital for the rest of his life. He gathered courage and said, "Forgive me, please, I'm to blame for everything." "Don't talk nonsense," she replied, gently stroking his hand. "It's such a blessing to carry a girl and give birth to her. The main thing is for her to be alive and happy. Why didn't you tell me earlier, Ophelia?" "I didn't think about it, honestly. And then it was too late." "Don't beat yourself up about me, Conrado. I knew I wouldn't be here for long, but thanks to you, I will live. Our daughter will live." Conrado took care of the funeral and paternity registration himself. Ophelia had managed to compose a statement asking Conrado to register their daughter for himself and raise her as his own. With this statement, he went to the Registro Civil and, giving a bribe, left with the birth certificate where he and Ophelia were listed as Yara's parents. Marcelina's parents, upon learning of Ophelia's tragic death, didn't object to Conrado taking the child into his home. A neonatologist began to visit. Marcelina started feeding the baby with her milk. Perhaps the child could have been left in the family, but the birth certificate was already done. Conrado didn't show it, but he didn't intend to postpone the conversation with his wife for long and decided to tell everything as it was on the coming Sunday. "Marcelina," he began, entering the nursery where she was changing the baby's diaper, "we need to talk." "What is it?" His wife was entirely absorbed in the process. He approached the changing table and looked at the little girl. She looked at him with the same aquamarine eyes her mother had. He took a deep breath. "This is my daughter. Ophelia and I have been together for the past 2 years. She got pregnant, but it turned out she had a heart disease, and now Ophelia is gone, and the little girl is left." A heavy silence hung in the air. Marcelina distanced herself from the baby and gave Conrado an icy, hateful look. "And you brought her to me?" Marcelina asked. "So that I wouldn't cry over the fact that our little one died?" "Yes. Like, it's a toy? Go ahead, hold her, and play with her, right? Don't talk nonsense." Conrado did not expect such a reaction. Nonsense? His wife became increasingly furious. You were sleeping with both of us for 2 years. God, what a fool I am. How could I not guess that you didn't stay late at work and take me on vacation so often for no reason? You were trying to make sure I didn't suspect anything. You're right. Conrado didn't deny it. But I couldn't break up with her when I found out about her heart disease. I couldn't leave the child. Your child, yes. You're selfish. You have a child with that slut. And mine? My child didn't even survive until birth. He died, and you brought this bastard. Conrado couldn't hold back and slapped her. He hoped to bring her to her senses, but instead, she flew into a rage and started throwing bottles and diapers from the room into the hallway. I don't need this child. I hate her, and I hate you. I hate all of you. You have a child, and I don't. I won't let you mock me. Don't ever bring me the child of that whore. Go to hell with her, I won't touch her with a finger. Marcelina, we are adults. The child is not to blame for anything. I admit my guilt to Ophelia and to you. I was really in a bad place, believe me. He tried to embrace Marcelina, but she had already avoided him and retreated to the window, leaving him alone with the little girl. But life goes on, he said, nodding towards the child. She needs love, warmth, and her mother's hands. I agree, let's live separately for some time, but let's not burn bridges. I won't live with a liar, Marcelina shouted, and she dashed out of the room at lightning speed. So the attempt to reconcile and keep the girl in the family ended in nothing. Since Conrado had bought the apartment with his own funds, he kept it along with the wonderful, cozy nursery during the property division. Over time, Marcelina's parents resumed communication with him. However, Marcelina blocked his number and didn't want to know anything about him. Her former father-in-law minimized communication, and only Nora occasionally visited Conrado and helped a bit with the little girl. I always wanted to take care of my nephews, she said slightly ingratiatingly, so please let me come here. I'm very grateful to you, Nora, Conrado sincerely replied. Business at work continued to thrive. Regardless of what was happening in his personal life, for him and his former father-in-law, the business was above all. A year later, he learned that Marcelina was getting married for the second time. It seemed like everything was falling into place, and Conrado was watching Yara grow with tenderness. Over the next 5 years, Conrado had been confidently leading the company and raising Yara. The company opened offices in several cities, and profits were increasing. His former father-in-law was clearly pleased with the current situation and did not mention the past. Nora still visited Yara. Marcelina got married for the second time, quickly became pregnant, and gave birth to a healthy boy. Conrado wasn't in a rush to change anything in his personal life. He unexpectedly enjoyed the state of personal freedom he gained after the divorce. The loveless marriage left such an impression on him that he had no desire for new relationships. Besides, he was occupied with Yara. At 3 years old, she started drawing and immediately showed great talent. Conrado showed her Ophelia's drawings, told her about her mom, but didn't rush to explain why her mom wasn't around. He was confident he'd have time to tell her everything and explain, and for now, it was better not to traumatize the child. He enjoyed taking her to daycare and picking her up. He felt silent pride, catching the glances of mothers whose husbands almost never showed up at the kindergarten. He had strolled with Yara for long hours on weekends, watched cartoons with her, and invented fairy tales that she would draw for him. He thought he knew everything in advance. At 7, Yara would go to school, attend classes at some art school, then enter university and become an artist. Perhaps he would have an affair with a woman. And if not, he was easily willing to wait until his daughter grew up. After all, a man with money was guaranteed to find a wife, he was sure. In September, at a closed party for advertising professionals, he met Eleonora. This ambitious, sporty-looking brunette came to conquer the capital from a small town and worked in a small advertising firm as an advertising procurement manager. Conrado himself couldn't remember how he got her phone number, but literally the next day, Eleonora was texting him on Messenger, calling, and sending funny pictures. At first, he thought he didn't need it. Firstly, he had plans for his life until his daughter finished school. Besides, Eleonora was not a fool, but there was almost nothing to talk about with her other than advertising. Nevertheless, he agreed to a meeting in a cafe, then another, and unexpectedly realized that he wanted to spend time with her. It was easy with her. She had already bought her own apartment in the capital and seemed like a self-sufficient woman. Then he introduced her to Yara. At first, the child was shy, but soon she enjoyed talking to Eleonora about dresses and colors. Eleonora genuinely rejoiced at the drawings that little Yara brought her, and the child blossomed with admiration and praise. Conrado realized that he wouldn't be able to support his daughter like a woman, and he started paying more attention to Eleonora. When he proposed to Eleonora, his former father-in-law unexpectedly appeared and offered to sell him his country house. Conrado was surprised but promised to consider the offer. It seemed strange to him that his father-in-law showed such interest in his life at this particular moment. He shared this with his friend Vasco, who reasonably noted that such a coincidence was indeed suspicious, but it was difficult to confirm the suspicion. Conrado tried to find out something about Eleonora, but apart from what he already knew, he discovered nothing new. She was born in a small town, moved to the capital 2 years ago, quickly bought an apartment, and worked for an advertising agency. Was it her persistence? Well, what if she genuinely liked him? After all, Yara wouldn't have accepted her if she sensed something was wrong. Children always feel bad when a person is not good. Conrado bought the country house and married Eleonora. The three of them lived in his apartment, spending weekends at the country house. A year passed. On their first wedding anniversary, Eleonora prepared a surprise for him and frequently visited the country house. Finally, on the anniversary day, she brought him breakfast in bed, playfully caressing him, and whispered, "A surprise is waiting for you at the country house." Conrado playfully replied, pulling her towards him. "I'll go after it alone?" Yes, she lightly pushed away from him. First the surprise, then me. "Oh, you robber," Conrado forcefully pulled her towards him and kissed her tightly. "Tell me what you've prepared." She artistically fended off her husband's caresses and finally slipped out of bed. "You won't forget this. I really tried hard, trust me. It's an absolutely luxurious gift. I'm sure you'll appreciate it." A couple of hours later, Conrado, with confusion, drove towards the country house. It was strange that Eleonora so insistently sent him there alone. He remembered how Yara hugged him in a special way before leaving, whispering, "I won't let you go, Daddy." On the suburbs exit that day, several cars collided. He didn't want to go around, so Conrado decided to turn around and go back home. But as soon as he tried to maneuver out of the traffic jam to turn towards the city, he saw Eleonora's car heading to the country house. He thought he might have been mistaken, but he knew for sure that her orange Mercedes was the only one in the entire city. So she was going to the country house, waiting for him with a surprise. And what about him? Could he not come? So, he maneuvered and bypassed the traffic jam, heading towards the country house. This 3-story country house with a huge garden, garage, and magnificent lawn in front of the house always pleased him. Deep down, he was very grateful to his father-in-law for selling him a house where Conrado could genuinely rest. But now, some oppressive feeling wouldn't let him go, as if something terrible, irreversible, and inevitable was about to happen. He entered the yard, expecting to see his wife's car, but it wasn't there. He was surprised because he had definitely seen her car. On the other hand, perhaps it was part of the surprise. Right now, he came here, and later she would join him. He parked the car in the garage and entered the house. Balloons shaped like white swans and inflatable wedding rings were hanging in the living room, and romantic music was playing. Conrado called his wife by name and walked to the second floor, but the door to their bedroom was inexplicably closed. Apparently, this was also part of the surprise. He was surprised and went back to the living room. Meanwhile, his mobile rang. It was Eleonora. "Are you already there?" Her voice sounded muffled and playful. Yes, waiting for you, Conrado replied. I'm stuck in traffic, darling. When I arrive, we'll get straight to the surprise, she purred, but for now, have a snack. Well, I'm not really hungry. By the time I get there, you'll be hungry. I insist. Okay, Conrado nodded. I'll wait for you. I'll be there soon. A sound of a kiss echoed through the phone, and the call ended. Conrado approached the table. There were various salads, grilled salmon, assorted snacks, drinks, and champagne. He felt genuinely hungry, especially when he caught the scent of fish and freshly boiled potatoes. She'll come soon. After all, why did I come here for nothing? He thought while serving salads on a plate. After some thought, he poured a glass of champagne. Pleasant, relaxing music was flowing from the distant speakers. He sat at the table and started eating. The warmth of the hot dishes, combined with the salads and champagne, relaxed him and set him in a drowsy mood. Conrado realized that he was falling asleep. Leaving the table, he collapsed on the leather couch. He stopped feeling his arms and legs, his head grew heavy, and he felt himself embarking on a journey. On this journey, he saw people entering the living room, glancing at him, and heading upstairs, presumably to the bedroom. It seemed as if he heard laughter, which turned into a child's cry. Through the haze of sleep, Conrado wanted to get up and run to his daughter, but his legs wouldn't obey him. His head, heavy on his neck, reminded him of a bobblehead toy, the one usually placed in a car in front of the driver, constantly shaking its head. He dreamed of being carried out of the house and taken somewhere, feeling every kilometer the car covered, but his body was weightless and unresponsive. When he opened his eyes, his head was spinning and aching, and a bright light hit his face. He tried to close his eyes with his hand and realized he wasn't at home. He looked to the right, then to the left. Seeing white walls and bright light from the window, he knew exactly where he was, hospital. He ran his hand over the blanket, touched his face. He had a bristle on his chin. How long have I been here? Conrado asked aloud, listening to his own voice, and unexpectedly heard the thin voice of the nurse, who, as it turned out, was sitting nearby. 5 days. What's wrong with me? Severe intoxication. How can that be? He exclaimed in confusion, continuing to run his hand over his face. Where's my wife? Did she eat that food too? Is she alive? I don't know, the girl shook her head. I know nothing about your wife. You're here alone with intoxication. Conrado struggled to remember the night when he arrived at the country house and found a set table, but nothing came to mind, as if everything had been mysteriously erased from his memory, and he was worried about his wife and daughter more and more. He began to suspect something unpleasant. Help me get up, I need to talk to the doctor. He tried to grab the edge of the bed, but his head was splitting, and his body still wouldn't obey him. Wait, the girl said quickly and left the room, locking the door behind her. Conrado became alert. He didn't know how much time had passed, but finally, the key turned in the lock, and a doctor and a man in uniform appeared in the doorway. 2 police officers followed. How do you feel? The doctor asked, and Conrado noted some apprehension in his tone, which he didn't try to conceal. Awful, my head hurts. That's expected. You had a very strong intoxication. It's amazing that you survived. Can I ask him a couple of questions? The man in uniform asked. I think so, but don't overdo it, the doctor warned. I'll stay in case you need emergency help. The man, a stocky middle-aged man with a short haircut and deep-set eyes, approached Conrado and sat on a chair. Tell me, what do you remember about the night when you came to your house? Honestly? Nothing, Conrado replied. My head hurts badly, I can't remember anything. Did you go to the 2nd floor? I don't remember, I think I did. My wife was supposed to come, I was waiting for her. The man nodded, memorizing something. When you entered, did you see anyone there? I don't remember. Don't remember or didn't see? I don't remember, I think I didn't see. All right, that's it, doctor. Watch him, do not release him from the room. Inform us when he starts recovering. When the delegation left, Conrado stared at the door, which was once again closed from the outside, for some time, wondering what was happening. His head continued to ache over the next couple of days. During this time, he discovered that 2 police officers were constantly guarding his room, but he couldn't get any information from the doctors or nurses. They all averted their eyes and claimed to know nothing. A week later, when the doctor said he was healthy enough, Conrado got his clothes back. As he got dressed, he glanced at himself in the mirror. A tired, unkempt man was looking back at him. He tried to open the door, but it was locked. Approaching the window, he saw a police van parked outside the hospital. Initially, he thought his security detail had arrived, but then another thought pierced his mind. Guards could have come in a regular car. If there was a police van and he was being discharged today, then the key turned in the lock. He turned around sharply and saw the same man in uniform entering the room with a firm step, announcing, "Conrado Moya, you are charged with the murder of 2 people. You have the right to defend yourself. You will be provided with a lawyer, or you can hire your own. I also remind you that anything you say or do may be used against you, so I recommend not resisting and proceeding with the investigative isolation until the court hearing." "But this is absurd. I didn't kill anyone," Conrado exclaimed. "We'll investigate that. If you didn't kill anyone, you'll be released." The man in uniform cut him off and gestured for his comrades to put handcuffs on Conrado. He was placed in a cell with a real murderer who had drunkenly killed his girlfriend. He had been convicted once before, and, with a detached look, the first thing he told Conrado was his story, concluding, "Here I am, going through the process again. But you know, man, think about how much I've avoided in life. I didn't get an education, and I never really worked. Isn't that happiness? What do you say?" Conrado shrugged and approached the window. Outside, the October rain was falling, and leaves generously covered the sidewalks. He thought that he hadn't talked to his daughter for too long, but all requests to talk to her on the phone were met with refusal. Anger overwhelmed him, and he hit the wall with his fist. "Hey, why are you damaging public property?" Conrado shot a hostile look at his cellmate but restrained himself, remembering that the neighbor was in for murder. "I'm angry because they won't let me talk to my daughter. I'm her only relative." "That's bad, of course. If they convict you, they'll send the girl to an orphanage. Do you have a lawyer?" "Yes," Conrado nodded. "But what's the use? The lawyer says all the evidence is against me. He's unlikely to do anything. And you act like you're innocent?" Squinted the neighbor. "Well," Conrado protested, "I almost died from poisoning, and now they're accusing me of murder. Of course, I didn't kill anyone. Well, things happen, you know? Maybe you forgot something. And if you didn't forget, maybe someone is trying to get rid of you." Conrado was silently staring at the floor of his cell. Neither Eleonora nor Marcelina's parents nor even his co-workers had visited him during all this time. Why? He couldn't remember what happened at the country house. But now he was beginning to understand that this indifference was not without reason. It was clear that he was not just left and forgotten. He horrifically realized that the murderer's neighbor was right. Yara was supposed to be sent to an orphanage. He rushed to the cell door, pounded on it with his hands, kicked with his feet, and eventually collapsed to the floor, sobbing. "You're here for a long time," a quiet voice whispered in his head, and then Conrado heard the neighbor speaking to him. "If you're innocent, as you say, it's better to accept it. It will be worse if you start resisting. They'll give you a sentence, and then, maybe, you'll be released on amnesty. But if you resist, they'll keep you for the full term. What's your daughter's name?" "Yara," Conrado replied through tears. "Well, God willing, you'll get out and find her. And if you don't find her, you'll find another woman. You'll get married and have another daughter." Conrado remembered Yara's eyes, got up from the floor, walked to the bed, and collapsed onto it with a groan. At the trial, he was charged with the murder of 2 people. The investigation claimed that together with two citizens, a 25-year-old girl and a 38-year-old man, the accused had been drinking alcohol at the country house, and then they had an argument, and he stabbed them in his bedroom. Conrado did not admit guilt, but the doctor, relying on the expert examination data, determined that the observer had partial memory loss, so he probably didn't remember what he had done. He was charged with a 15-year sentence. Neither his wife nor Marcelina's parents were in the courtroom. Realizing the hopelessness of appeals, Conrado asked to meet with an old friend. "Vasco, I'm begging you to save at least some of my photos, especially those with Yara. Maybe you have Ophelia's photos too. I'll get out of here, I'll find my daughter." "I'll do it," Vasco said seriously. "Just take care of yourself. Prison is a dangerous place." The next day, Conrado went to prison in a special vehicle. Of the 15 years, only the first and last seemed endless. In the first year, Conrado sometimes silently cried, realizing that he might never get out or find his daughter. In the next 13 years, he resigned himself to the fact that he would have to live on parole and directed all his efforts to preserve his mental health. He started assisting the priest in his teachings, learned prayers, and joined the choir. Sometimes during services, it seemed to him that he vividly saw Yara, how she was growing up, studying in school, drawing. Now that she was 15, probably she fell in love for the first time. Again and again, he prayed to God and asked him to protect his little girl, keep her safe, and guide her in life. Vasco occasionally visited him. Eleonora filed for divorce almost immediately after Conrado was arrested. He became increasingly convinced that he did indeed see Mercedes on that fateful day, and perhaps everything was made up to accuse him of murder and lock him up. But why? Who wanted to ruin his life and, more importantly, the life of his child? Yara was placed in an orphanage. Vasco also informed him of that. However, a few years later, it turned out that a couple had adopted Yara, but Vasco could not find any information about these people. In the last year of his sentence, Conrado was preparing a plan of action. He intended to find Eleonora, go to her, and make her talk to him honestly. Then, he would find his daughter, get a job, and start a new life. However, even this was not destined to happen. All of Conrado's accounts were suspended as soon as he entered prison. Now, upon his release, he discovered that his apartment was sold to immigrants from some African country. The country house was also sold, and Eleonora had disappeared without a trace. He couldn't get an official job because of a conviction for murder. Once again, Vasco helped him. He suggested moving to their hometown, freelancing anonymously, and simultaneously searching for Yara. Initially, Conrado did not want to leave the capital, but after 6 months of trying to find an unofficial job, he had to admit that the idea of moving wasn't that bad. At first, he struggled to find a job there too, and Conrado had to collect food and clothes from city dumpsters. However, gradually, he achieved his goal. He rented an apartment under Vasco's name, paid for it diligently, and tried to restore lost knowledge and skills to the maximum, realizing that starting a life as an honest man would take some time. One thought inspired him, and he imagined that one day, when he would find his daughter and tell her the truth, she shouldn't have been ashamed of him. However, getting information about Yara proved to be impossible. She should have turned 20 by now. Maybe she was even planning to get married. And, who knows, perhaps in these years, in another family with people who became her parents, she had already forgotten about her real father. The thought that he, at the age of over 40, might end up completely alone terrified Conrado. His parents divorced, he never knew his father, and his mother died shortly after his move to the capital. Yara was his only true family. But he didn't know how to find her, and sometimes he drowned his overwhelming despair in brandy. Life went on. Conrado still lived in his hometown and worked tirelessly to save up and return to the capital. Now that he lived among ordinary people, not constantly evolving businessmen and their beautiful wives, he remembered the years spent in prison. A thick thirst for revenge welled up in his chest. He went to the church and confessed, but the desire to see those who ruined his life and took away his daughter and to witness their punishment returned again and again. "Please, understand, I don't want something terrible to happen to them," he whispered to the priest, "but I can't let go. They took away my daughter, and I can't find out anything about her. If only I knew that everything was fine, but I don't know, and that's why." "You're angry," the priest replied. "Don't be. When there's anger, you can't hear love, you don't hear your heart. They call it intuition, but in reality, it's a kind of heart's voice. When you think about your little daughter, forget everything that happened to you and just listen to what your heart says, alive or not, happy or not. After all, you're her real father." Conrado nodded. "You'll find out that it's not only a mother's heart that sees clearly." "I just want to find her," Conrado stubbornly asserted. And once again, the priest's subdued voice reassured him. "Trust the Lord. If she is alive and well, the Lord will arrange everything, and you will meet." "But what if she doesn't recognize me?" Conrado shared the fears that had tormented him for the past 5 years. The priest shrugged. "We always recognize our loved ones, and your mind is too restless, always trying to calculate and know in advance, wanting to run ahead of God. Can you do that? A man is foolish because he constantly tries to jump ahead. You should be humble. You can't do more than you're doing now. That's His will. And then new possibilities and answers come immediately. You're thinking about how to find her, but she might just find you herself," and he concluded, catching Conrado's amazed gaze, "for the ways of the Lord are inscrutable." Conrado returned home, recalling the priest's words. He had approached him before, but previously, the priest seemed stern and evoked fear. Now, a warm feeling of acceptance emanated from the priest, as if this father, whom Conrado had never known, suddenly appeared in his life and, like a man, confidentially led him towards the light, this lost and unhappy man. At home, Conrado turned on the TV and went to prepare dinner. With a plate of pasta, he returned to the room and sat in front of the television, where the broadcaster, a beautiful tan brunette, announced, "Our broadcast is coming to an end, and we invite you to our next show, This Is How I See It, dedicated to the young creative people of our homeland. Today, the guest of the program is the artist Yara Moya from the capital. She will talk about where she finds inspiration and the role her family played in her development. The host is Natalia Santos." Conrado settled in comfortably. He liked this program. Young artists created in different genres and styles, and he remembered his student years, numerous sketches, Ophelia and her works, and Yara's drawings, still awkward but so inspired. This young girl was called Yara, and on the screen, there was her large portfolio, her hands with a brush or pastel pencils, and her view from the back flashed. The voice off camera read the introduction. Yara says that her hometown, books, and cinema help her create. Let's listen to her. Conrado heard a pleasant, melodious voice marked by youthful enthusiasm. "I really love movies. When I was little, my adoptive parents often took me to the Illusion Theater. Probably, that's where I finally decided to become an artist. I was amazed by the movie posters. The movies themselves were very artistic. I literally saw some scenes like paintings and even came up with names for them." Conrado nodded approvingly as he listened to her. But the girl's face had not been shown yet. Instead, the voice behind the scenes began listing the creative achievements of the young lady. Winner of the Presidential Grants Competition for creating a series of paintings, a Fellow of the Academy of Arts, and a winner of the Gold Medal. The list of achievements was impressive and somewhat boring to Conrado, as all of this had long passed him by and held no interest. Good for her, what can you say, he thought to himself, slowly moving the camera from the easel along the girl's fingers to her shoulders, thick copper-colored hair, sculpted neck, cheekbones, straight nose, and eyes of a familiar aquamarine color. In the first moment, Conrado could not believe his eyes, but the longer this beautiful, inspired face remained on the screen, the clearer it became that he was looking at his daughter. "Yara!" he exclaimed, pushed his plate aside, and rushed to call his friend. On Sundays, Vasco was usually out of town, but this time Conrado managed to catch him at home. "Vasco, they're showing Yara on TV," Conrado joyfully shouted into the phone. There was a pause. Vasco clearly pondered who was Yara he was talking about. Before Conrado could explain to him, Vasco almost shouted, "Your daughter? Are you sure?" "Vasco, I saw her eyes. There are no other eyes like hers. She inherited them from her mother." Meanwhile, Vasco turned on the TV, and after a while, he said, "Conrado, congratulations. The girl has grown up beautifully." Overwhelmed with happiness, Conrado almost didn't hear what Vasco was saying. He realized that his daughter was alive and still pursuing such a brilliant career as an artist. His head was spinning and aching. He abruptly apologized and hung up. The girl continued her story. "I was really lucky with people. True, I lost the closest ones. Mom died when I was very little, and Dad died when I was about 5. I'm alive," Conrado exclaimed. "They sent me to an orphanage, but I didn't stay there for long. While Dad was alive, his friend Nora used to visit us, and we became very close. And then she adopted me, and Dad's wife disappeared when he died. But now I'm alone again. When I was 19, Nora and her husband died in a plane crash. Fortunately, I was already an adult, so I coped. I worked with a psychologist and found the strength to continue living and creating. The My Family series is dedicated to this theme, gaining and losing close relatives. It must be difficult to go through such losses at your age?" the host asked sympathetically. Yara smiled, and Conrado recognized those childish dimples and the tender, open joy that was so abundant in those distant days. "I have a boyfriend. He's a lawyer, but he supports me a lot, and his family does too. Of course, it's not easy, but I believe that in a better world, all my relatives are happy and healthy, and that gives me the strength to live." Conrado burst into tears. He cried out of helplessness, out of fear that now she, his daughter, wouldn't want to know anything about him, as she thought he had been dead for so long. He felt the burning desire for revenge for all the losses, pain, and fears in his chest. But then a thought pierced him. What if vengeance is already catching up with people? Why did Nora adopt someone else's child so easily, and why did she constantly visit the girl for all those 5 years? What if it wasn't just about providing care? Horror engulfed him when he thought that everything that happened to him 20 years ago was planned in advance and orchestrated by his former father-in-law and mother-in-law. The pressure rose, and he lay down on the couch. The show ended, and he turned off the TV. The phone rang again. It was Vasco. "So, what are you going to do?" he asked briskly. "I don't know, my friend," Conrado responded barely audibly. "You need to meet her." "Yes, probably, but Vasco, she doesn't even remember me." Vasco paused, thinking. "I've kept all the photos you asked for. You can show them to her." "But what if she doesn't want to communicate?" Conrado shared his fear. "She has such a successful career, and here I am, a criminal." "Yes, it is serious," Vasco agreed. "But you don't necessarily have to tell her everything right away. How do I explain to her that I'm alive but haven't bothered to text or call her in 20 years? "Well, who knows what might happen," Vasco stretched out. "Don't think too much, you're not almighty. It's better to think about how you will find her." "I can call the editorial office and ask for her phone," Conrado suggested puzzledly. "Yeah, just call and say, 'Hello, Yara, I'm your real dad.'" "No, my friend, we have to do it differently." "How about through social media?" "That's an option. But again, what will you say? 'Hello, Yara, I'm your dad.' She might block you and report you to the police for harassment. Should I come to her exhibition?" "Well, that's just a plot for the telecast," Vasco laughed. "No, look, she has a website. Let me write to her and say that I knew her parents and that I have her childhood photos with them. If she agrees, we'll meet, I'll tell her more, and I'll give her the photos. And then we'll see, maybe you can come in person later. Vasco's idea sounded quite convincing. Conrado couldn't find anything to object to. On the same day, they chose one of the pictures of the girl, where she was with Conrado, Eleonora, and Nora, and Vasco sent her the following message. Hello, Yara. I watched your interview with interest. The thing is, I knew your real parents. I think you would be interested to know about them. I'm sending you a photo where you are with your real father, his wife, and your future adoptive mother. Your father is alive, but he didn't know anything about you for a long time. I would like to meet you, pass on the photos I have, and tell you about your dad. They sent the letter on Sunday evening. Throughout the work week, Conrado couldn't focus on his job, asking Vasco 3 times a day if there was a response. There was no reply. Maybe she doesn't check her email every day? Vasco speculated on Tuesday evening. I'll forward it to you as soon as she responds. Did you check the spam folder? Conrado clarified. I check everything constantly, Vasco assured him. Conrado, I'm worried about you. You've been through so much, another person might have given up already, but you're working and going to church. Well, I go to church, so I won't give up, Conrado smirked. I understand, but wait, maybe it's not the right time yet. A response arrived a week later. The girl wrote, Hello, Vasco. I couldn't respond immediately, your letter caught me off guard. So, my dad is alive. Nora said he turned out to be a bad person, and something happened to him, probably he died. Do you know anything about him? Was he in prison? Where is he now? I really want to meet you and talk about him. But my boyfriend will come with me if you don't mind. At the end of the letter, she left her phone number for contact. Vasco deemed it necessary to warn Conrado. Don't call her yourself, you might scare her. Conrado felt out of sorts the entire week, constantly picking up his phone and looking at his daughter's number. There she was, he could just call her, but Vasco was right, there was no need to frighten her. After all, the years of separation demanded delicacy. That's when the friends decided to go to the capital together and meet her as a team. Just stay away, and I'll lead the conversation, prepare her, and then call you in, Vasco suggested. Conrado agreed. Now that his daughter had indeed found him, he remembered the priest's words and tried very hard not to rush, not to get ahead. The friends took a morning train. In the capital, they stayed with one of Vasco's distant relatives, who lived in the eastern part of the city. They scheduled the meeting in a cozy cafe. Yara herself reserved a table in a private area for a quiet conversation. I'll go in first and say hello to her. You come in a bit later. I don't want her to see us together immediately, Vasco instructed. He brought a tablet with him, storing the entire photo archive in one of the folders, which he had downloaded per Conrado's request. The same archive was on a flash drive that he intended to give to the girl. Wait, Conrado said, what if I give her the flash drive instead? Vasco said. That's a good idea, he nodded approvingly. I'll say that I have a flash drive and that I'll bring it, like I left it in my coat, and then we'll come in together, that's it. He smiled, looking at Conrado's bewildered and tense face. Everything will be fine, Conrado. With these words, Vasco entered the restaurant. Conrado remained standing on the street. It was the middle of the week, and the place was full of cars. He looked at the shiny new black Mercedes and Autos, reminiscing about the time when he owned the same car. He remembered the smell of new leather in the cabin, and his hands recalled the touch of the steering wheel and the gearbox. He used to drive on this street occasionally and wait at the traffic lights. The capital had changed significantly over the years. Although he couldn't yet grasp the spirit of these changes and whether he liked them or not, the wind blew a little, causing him to shiver, but he continued to stand outside the restaurant, glancing at his watch. They decided that Vasco would let him know when he could come in and request a table. Finally, Conrado received a text message from Vasco, and he was about to enter the restaurant when he suddenly froze. Eleonora was walking towards him. There was still something about the woman who once persistently courted him to get married. At least he knew for sure that it was her, but her face was somewhat puffy, her former figure barely recognizable under a black, shabby coat, and her gait was unsteady. It was evident that she had been drinking. Unexpectedly, he found out that she recognized him too. "Conrado, is that you?" She rushed to hug him, enveloping him in the scent of alcohol and stale cigarette smoke. "Look who is here," she laughed, showing a mouth that was missing 2 teeth, and the rest were ominously discolored. "What brings you here? Were you released?" "I was," Conrado answered, distancing himself. "I'm here on business." "Where do you live?" "Your ex-father-in-law gave me an apartment here, not far." "And where are you? How long are you staying?" "I don't know yet," Conrado honestly replied. "Well, look, we could meet," she winked. "I just need to warn my partner that my ex-husband is visiting, or he'll get jealous." "Give me your address," Conrado requested, opening his phone. Eleonora dictated her number to him and again started hugging. "You look quite well," she noted. "When they locked you up at 15, I thought you'd never come out again. And here you are, alive, and you'll be healthier than me." She laughed again with a scary laugh. "What can we expect from you? You're a man, a tough nut," and she laughed again. Conrado was watching her as she swayed to the traffic light and then turned right. She probably walked along the boulevard to the monument and then turned left if she was going home, of course. He shivered. Her clothes were branded but no longer new, her makeup emphasized her ugliness, and the smell of expensive cigarettes caused disgust, just like the missing teeth and vulgar laughter. Conrado shuddered when he thought that a person who had spoiled his fate had paid for it with her beauty and health. Strangely enough, this didn't evoke a sense of satisfaction in him. On the contrary, he caught himself feeling sorry for her, or rather, sympathizing with her. She would probably drink herself into oblivion in the next year or two. Vasco interrupted these thoughts by rushing out, pretending to smoke. "I texted you, then went out as if to the restroom, but you were nowhere to be found." "Didn't you get the text?" he asked. "I met my ex-wife," Conrado explained. Vasco looked at him in amazement. "She's drinking heavily and living nearby. She gave me her address and phone number." "Why do you need that?" Vasco asked. "I want to find out who set me up." "Do you think she'll tell you?" "For a bottle, she'll spill everything," Conrado smirked. "All right, you go inside. I'll be back soon." "How's my daughter?" Conrado was worried. "She's a great girl," Vasco reported. "We had a little chat. I left them alone with her boyfriend. I handed over my tablet. They're looking through the photos." "Did they talk about me?" "Not much yet. I'll be back soon, and we'll get into it. Go inside, don't drag it out." Conrado waited for another 5 minutes and entered the restaurant. He requested a table in the corner so he wouldn't accidentally run into his daughter ahead of time. Initially, he ordered just coffee, but soon he felt incredibly hungry and asked for a hot meal. He felt that he couldn't and didn't want to think about anything. Not even prayers came to mind. This state was not like numbness, rather, it was a calm acceptance of everything that was about to happen. Quiet instrumental music filled the restaurant, creating a peaceful atmosphere. He slowly consumed his lunch, and his gaze slid over the faces of the patrons, never lingering on anyone for long. A quiet, pleasant thought spread through his body. Everything is very good. Everything that is happening is very good. The phone screen lit up, and he got a text message from Vasco. Conrado read it. "Come in, she's waiting for you." Conrado jumped up, suddenly feeling his calm replaced by agitation. What would she say? How would she look at him? What about her boyfriend? What would he think? What would he say? And then he remembered Eleonora, the smell of cigarettes and alcohol, and her unsteady gait. The same awaits him if he doesn't go to his daughter right now. And resolutely, he headed to the intimate dining area. Yara was sitting there. Her boyfriend was hugging her around her shoulders. The emotions on her face indicated that she was going through a whirlwind of feelings. Yet, as soon as she saw Conrado, she abruptly stood up and moved towards him, accidentally bumping into the table. "Hello, Yara," he said. He felt awkward and unsure of how to behave. "Hello," she said. "Well, here you are." An unknown force compelled Conrado to open his arms, into which his daughter rushed. They embraced tightly. He hesitantly ran his hand through her hair, that familiar copper color. He didn't know what would happen next, but he wanted to prolong this moment as much as possible. "You used to run to me and hide in your childhood when you were scared," he smiled. She remained silent. "And used to like pulling my ears." "Seriously?" She stepped back and raised her aquamarine eyes at him. And he remembered Ophelia. All 5 years spent with the child flashed before his eyes, and tears flowed on their own. He stepped back and sat down. Yara returned to her place next to the young man. Everyone was silent, only Vasco pushed a napkin holder towards Conrado. After a while, when Conrado regained his composure, it was time to introduce each other. He told Yara and her potential future son-in-law about how he came to conquer the capital, married Nora's daughter, had an affair with Yara's mother, was left alone with his daughter, and later Eleonora appeared. "Here," Yara said. "You know, I saw her a couple of times in the center. I remember her." "Did you talk?" Conrado asked. "No, why would I?" "Do you know Marcelina?" Vasco clarified. "We met a few times, but never got close. I knew she was supposed to be my older sister, as her parents adopted me, but she always kept her distance. Now I understand why." "How is she?" Conrado asked. "The last time we met was at a funeral," Yara replied. "I think she's seriously ill, lost a lot of weight, divorced her second husband, and he took the child." There was a pause. Everyone was silent. But the thought that everything in the world is not accidental hovered over the table. "Why didn't you defend yourself?" Yara asked. Conrado shrugged. "All my accounts were frozen immediately. Probably so that I couldn't hire a lawyer. I didn't admit guilt, but..." Yara paused and then asked in a cold tone, "Do you think Nora and Paolo made everything up?" "How would I know?" Conrado replied. But then Vasco joined the conversation. "Of course. It seems to me that everything is clear. They hired Eleonora to marry you. Your ex-mother-in-law took care of the child for 5 years to make the girl get used to her, and then they just did their dirty work, framed you, and adopted the child. But why? What stopped Nora from visiting us? She could have visited us all her life. I wasn't against it. I thought she was taking care of me like a mother, especially since my own mother died. And she, like a snake, was waiting for the right moment. I don't understand. She always said she really wanted another child, but Paolo was against it," Yara said. "Probably that's why she did it." Everyone fell silent. Twilight descended on the capital, and the number of cars increased. Everyone began to disperse to their homes. Yara's young man broke the silence. "Maybe we should stop for today." "Where are you staying?" "At my relative's place," Vasco replied. "Let's meet at our place tomorrow. And think about what we can do. You probably want to return to the capital?" he asked Conrado. Conrado hesitated with the answer. He hadn't thought about it in the last few months. "I don't know, guys," he admitted. "Who would hire me if I was in prison? We'll find Eleonora and Marcelina and make the court overturn the verdict," the young man declared. Vasco and Conrado hadn't thought about it, but both understood that it wasn't so unreachable. "That's a brilliant idea," Vasco exclaimed. "Antonio, you're a genius," Yara said tenderly. "Then let's go to Eleonora tomorrow." "Do you have her address?" she asked Conrado. "Yes, everything is there. She lives nearby." "We are 10 kilometers from here," Antonio replied. Seeing Conrado's expression, he clarified. "It's the apartment where Yara lived as a child." Well, more precisely, my dad and I lived there, Yara clarified, nodding towards Conrado. Then I lived with Nora, but she and her husband always said that the apartment was mine and I could move there when I turned 18. So I did. Were you happy with them? Conrado asked a question that troubled him. Well, it's hard to say. The girl looked away, but her voice became quiet and shaky. They tried not to mention you at all, so gradually, I forgot what you looked like and what we used to play, but I remembered that you existed. And Nora and Paolo were old, it wasn't as interesting with them. I had a nanny, we played together, but it wasn't the same. Paolo got sick, he had hypertensive crises twice a year for the last 10 years. Nora was afraid of losing him. I understood that immediately after the first crisis, and then I felt that I couldn't replace him. She would always love him more than me. I don't know if I was happy. Probably yes. I had everything. They invested in my education and creative projects. I'm grateful to them for many things. But I will never understand why they did this to you. Vasco and Conrado returned home without speaking, and only at home, after dinner and getting ready for bed, Vasco said. Conrado, you're a hero. I recall all the events and everything we heard, and all I can think about is how sometimes karma catches up with people for all their actions. I thought about it too, Conrado replied, but I keep pulling myself back not to get proud. That's not right. There's nothing to be proud of here, Vasco reasoned. But we need to acknowledge the fact. Honestly, when I return to my hometown, I want to start going back to the church. Why do you need that? Conrado smirked. Do you have some circumstances? It's not about that, Vasco waved his hand. Life becomes easier, I see it when I look at you. I didn't pay attention before, but now I'm really thinking about it. Indeed, considering all you've been through, you didn't drown in alcohol, didn't go down the wrong path, and eventually found your daughter. That, my friend, probably isn't even my merit, Conrado said, shaking his head. Maybe, indeed, our loved ones somewhere watch over us, pray about us, or not, who knows, but perhaps they somehow protect us. The next morning, he called Eleonora to arrange a meeting. Dear, my buddy is not at home today. Are you sure you need to come today? I'm coming to you for business, Conrado replied. I won't come alone, I'm letting you know in advance. So tell your buddy not to worry. Who will come with you? She asked, businesslike. Are you okay if it's a surprise? Conrado suggested. Oh, you're such a joker, Eleonora laughed again. Come, I'm waiting. They arrived at the two-bedroom apartment in the same group as the previous day, Conrado, Vasco, Yara, and Antonio. The young man had a legal education and intended to record the conversation on a recorder. Eleonora greeted them with bewilderment, but upon closer inspection, she recognized Yara. Is this your daughter? She asked. That's her, Conrado replied. So you came to talk about yourself? She asked, biting her lip. Yes, about me, he nodded. Eleonora invited them into the living room. There was luxurious 18th century style furniture, already quite worn out. The windows faced a regular street. Conrado involuntarily remembered the view from his apartment, where in the evenings he could gaze at a beautiful multi-story building with a glass facade, and thought that not all apartments in the center of the capital could boast a beautiful view from the window. You'll have coffee, I assume, Eleonora clarified and rolled in a cart with cups. I prefer talking about such matters with wine. She silently observed as everyone poured themselves coffee, and when silence prevailed, she began her story. What should I tell you, Conrado? Well, I was a liar, just like you, by the way, you know that. I came, got a job, not much money, and got another one, they downsized there. Well, I didn't want to go back to my village. I started networking, thinking I'd find a job or a husband. And then one day, I started talking to Paolo. May he rest in peace. He started asking me where I'm from, how long I've been in the capital, and what I wanted. Well, I didn't hold back, I told him as it was, and he took my number. I noticed his ring back then. I thought, no, I won't get involved with a married man, but he called literally the next day and said, I really need to meet with you. I'll come with my daughter. We have a job offer for you. I went, of course. We met at some cafe. Your house was visible from the window. She nodded to Conrado, and his daughter was so beautiful. For the first 10 minutes, I was sitting there stunned, thinking that such people really exist. Figure, face, hair, a luxurious girl. And they treated me so well, we chatted. Then he says, let's get down to business. And he told me that his daughter was married to a young man, they had no children, and he had a mistress. And how he got involved with her, and both of them got pregnant almost simultaneously, the mistress and the wife. It was evident that it was difficult for her to recall everything after so many years. But she took a sip of wine and continued. And, in general, nobody knew anything. In the end, it turned out that the wife's child died, and the mistress gave birth and died herself. In short, it's a real soap opera. The child seemed to be of no use to anyone, and the wife lost hers. Well, then, supposedly, you suggested to your wife that you raise your daughter from the mistress, and she refused. Is that how it happened? That's right, Conrado nodded. And then, you see, Eleonora took a big sip of wine and continued, he told me, I can't let him go unpunished for this betrayal. Those were his exact words, I still remember. I, of course, told him, where's the betrayal here? Well, many people have mistresses. But he confessed, and besides, she died, the child needs a mother, and he has a wife. What else was there? No, his former wife said, I don't agree with this. I've already divorced him, I won't go back to him. But I want him to answer for everything. And then, honestly, she pressed her hand to her heart, I still don't understand why they wanted to settle the score so badly. Well, they told me all this, and then I asked, well, what do you need me for? And then her father told me, we have a plan, but we need someone who will receive his property. I was like, do you want me to get rid of him? Kill him? And he said, no, we won't do it ourselves, but we'll get rid of him, yes. And where he ends up, it'll go however it goes. If he stays alive, so be it, and if not, then not. They were sitting in silence for a while, then Eleonora continued. In short, my task was to ensnare you, which I, by the way, succeeded in doing. She laughed with her raspy, smoky laughter. Vasco cast a disapproving look at her. Wasn't it shameful to ruin someone's life? He asked her. Well, I didn't think much about it. I didn't even see the person they were talking about. It was only later, when I saw you, I thought, wow, he's a handsome man. But at that time, I didn't really care. They convinced me that I could get a job, stay in the capital, and, most importantly, it wouldn't affect me in any way. It was like, for me, the main thing was to get your property as a wife when everything was over and handed over to them. How terrible, Yara uttered. Eleonora threw a fleeting glance at her, then reached for a cigarette and lit it. So, I completed my mission, as you understand. I met you, charmed you, apparently your child too, and got married, as far as I remember. Well, with you, of course, it was great. But I was waiting, thinking when they would settle everything there and how much longer I had to pretend to be a loving wife, and I finally waited. A month before our anniversary, Paolo called me and warned that everything was ready, and I had to lure you to the dacha but make sure you ended up there without me. I didn't want to go, Conrado clarified. Yes, you shredded my nerves pretty well, Eleonora responded. You didn't even want to go on the actual day. I didn't know what to do to get you to leave, but you eventually agreed. Eleonora, Conrado asked, tell me, did you also come there in your orange Mercedes? Eleonora fell silent, thinking, then replied. I drove to Paolo's, brought your daughter there, the parents were going to the country house, and the child shouldn't have been left alone. After a short pause, she continued. Anyway, they organized everything that happened there, I didn't do anything. Well, I found out, of course, what they came up with. I was surprised back then, How much they must have hated you to bring those drunks there, to kill them, and blame it on you. Only after that did I drive in a couple of times and pick up some of my things. Vasco turned out to be so stingy, only giving back what was really mine. And what you bought, he kept for himself. I thought he'd let me manage your business, but no, he sold it along with the country house, and he gave me all the money and said I could live on it as long as it lasts. Well, I immediately bought this apartment instead of the one I had. I have good furniture and good clothes. I just knew I wouldn't find a job, but since I was in the capital and everything worked out so well, I had to stay. She chuckled and took a drag from her cigarette. So here I am, drinking, partying, and living with my man. He still works, but I never found another job here, and I didn't really want to. Eleonora, Antonio joined the conversation. Do you understand that Conrado was wrongly convicted and you participated in it? Will you testify? What testimony? She shrugged. What does it have to do with me? I haven't imprisoned him. I don't even know how they organized everything there. But you were an accomplice, the young man clarified. So what? It was evident that she had no intention of admitting guilt. He's alive and well. If he had died, what would you have to say then? Yara asked in an icy tone. I didn't count on anything, Eleonora retorted. Oh my, the guy got 15 years. Why should I care? Anything could have happened at that time. Am I supposed to keep agonizing over it all the time? Whether he lives or dies, I didn't need anything from him. But you got money through him, Vasco pointed out. Well, I got it through him, but I could have gotten it without him. Are you here to accuse me or what? No, Antonio replied. We came for the truth. Truth? You're still young, searching for the truth. Eleonora shook her head with a sad smile. The truth is what we choose it to be. That's what I've learned in life. There's only one truth, mine, and I'm not interested in anyone else's. Eleonora had no intention of sharing more details. The guests dispersed to their homes. The next day, they planned to visit Marcelina. However, the following morning, a message from Antonio woke Conrado and Vasco up. I just got a call from the police. Eleonora's partner called them last night. She jumped out of the window. The men exchanged glances. Conscience got to her, Vasco remarked. Conrado called Antonio. Will everything be okay for us? Yes, of course. The conversation is recorded, and I'll present it as evidence of her admission. At the same time, we'll initiate a review of your case to have the guilt lifted. 2 hours later, with the same group, they stood in the stairwell in front of Marcelina's apartment. No one came for a long time. I called her, Yara said bewilderedly. She said she would be at home. Then the door opened, and everyone saw Marcelina. She wore a turban on her head, and Conrado immediately guessed that she was hiding the effects of chemotherapy. Her eyes were deeply set, her nose and cheekbones were sharpened, and her weight was clearly insufficient. She recognized Conrado and was stunned. Leaning against the doorframe, she had been staring at him for a long time and then said, I thought I would never see you again. You look good, unlike me. With a gesture, she invited everyone inside. Her apartment was beautifully furnished. Conrado recognized items he had seen before in her parents' apartment, stone vases, golden tabletop clocks, and a few reproductions of still life. I don't have a caretaker today, Marcelina explained. I can't offer you anything. I feel heavy, and I think I'll be admitted to hospice soon. But please, have a seat. You probably want to know why Conrado and I did what we did. Not just why, but how, Yara replied. Perhaps my father did wrong too, but why were you so heartless? I don't know, Marcelina shrugged. I don't think I was heartless. Spoiled, yes, and heavily dependent on my father. It was his idea, actually. No, in reality, it was my mother who wanted to adopt you. She nodded towards Yara. And how could that be done if you had a father? Well, fortunately, they didn't want to kill him. They just decided to send him away, like, let him live as long as he lives. And in the end, you're alive and well, but there are almost none of us left. Sadness resonated in her voice. For a while, everyone was standing in silence, and suddenly, Marcelina, gathering her strength, approached Conrado and kneeled before him. He wanted to lift her, but she began to speak hesitantly and feverishly. I got married almost immediately and gave birth to a child. But when your father pulled me into all this, the family fell apart. At first, I didn't pay attention. I thought it was a coincidence that it would pass, but it didn't. It only got worse. My husband eventually found another woman and divorced me, taking the child with him. Tears streamed from her eyes, although her face remained calm. Imagine how I felt. Your father and mother treated your daughter as their own, and I was unwanted. Then, periodically, you started appearing in my dreams. I was thinking in every possible way that something had happened, probably with him. And then it hit me, and I thought about how stupid I had been. I should have agreed. We could have raised your daughter together. What was stopping me? What a fool I was. She turned out to be so talented. She went to contests and exhibitions, her parents were everywhere with her, and I was just passing by. Resentment and pain echoed in her voice. You can't imagine what I felt. Then they died in a crash, and I was left alone. I don't even know how I noticed that something was sucking in my stomach. I went to the doctor, and he just spread his hands. I don't remember how I even got home that day. I came in and immediately saw the turtle we brought from China. I took it in my hands and had been sitting like this for a day, thinking. I came to the conclusion that if I meet you, if you're alive, I'll throw myself at your feet and beg for forgiveness. Forgive me, Conrado, for God's sake, forgive me. A silence seemed to reign in the room. It felt like everyone had stopped breathing, with only the clock ticking away, stealing moments of life. Marcelina, I forgave you a long time ago, Conrado replied, lifting her from her knees. I won't hide it, sometimes I wish someone would settle the score for me. But truly, the ways of the Lord are inscrutable. I can't describe in words everything I learned these 2 days. Everyone got what they deserved, including me. But I feel sad for you. He hugged her. Marcelina spent another 2 months in hospice and passed away, leaving all her belongings to Conrado. Antonio kept his promise. He resumed the investigation and succeeded in having the charges against Conrado dropped. Now he could freely return to business in the capital. Conrado and Vasco sat in a cafe in their hometown before Vasco's departure to the capital. Thanks, my friend, Conrado spoke, looking him in the eyes. If it weren't for you, I would have perished. Oh, come on, Vasco waved it off. I just did what friends do. Thank God you survived those 15 years, your daughter is alive, and she has a good fiancé. Now, with business back on track, everything will finally fall into place. He fell silent. And I, my friend, will stay here. You know, I have a wife, kids, school, and extracurricular activities, but we'll visit, just give us a call. When Yara and Antonio met Conrado at the station, his daughter said, Dad, we've decided to give you a surprise. I hope you'll accept it. They drove through the wide streets and narrow alleys of the capital. Conrado had no suspicions until they parked in front of the building where his old apartment was. They climbed to the 5th floor. Yara opened the door. Dad, she addressed him when they took off their outerwear and entered one of the rooms, I want this apartment to be yours again. Antonio and I thought we'd sell Marcelina's apartment and buy something nearby, but this one is yours. When they left, Conrado rushed to the window. He managed to catch a glimpse of their departure. But most of all, he wanted to look at the view that once fascinated him. From the window, the multi-story building with a glass facade, which had so closely associated this corner of the capital with some foreign districts, was still visible. Conrado sank into a chair and stared at it for a long time. However, he no longer saw the building or the ponds, only replaying in his mind the moments when Yara was little and he thought he knew everything in advance.
If you're enjoying it as well, leave a like and subscribe.